Get away from my bike!" The growl came from a man who looked like he'd ripped himself straight out of a Sons of Anarchy episode. Alexander Kane, president of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, 6'3" of leather, tattoos, and the kind of danger that made smart people cross the street. His custom Harley-Davidson CVO Limited, $50,000 worth of chrome and rebellion, sat smoking in Chicago's West Side Industrial District like a dying dragon. "I said get the hell away from my bike, lady." The woman standing 3 feet from his machine didn't move. Tangled hair, torn jacket, backpack held together with duct tape. Just another homeless junkie, Alexander thought, about to learn what happens when you don't listen to the president of the most powerful motorcycle club in the Midwest. What Alexander Kane didn't know was that this homeless junkie was about to save his $50,000 custom Harley, expose a conspiracy that went back 5 years, and teach him that real strength had nothing to do with the patch on his back. Comment where you're listening from. Subscribe to channel. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and she'd been sleeping in doorways for 743 days. 26 months since the day her world imploded. Since the day Jonathan Price, CEO of Velocity Motors, pillar of the Chicago business community, Time Magazine's Innovator of the Year, decided that a woman who wouldn't sleep with him didn't deserve to exist. But here's what nobody knew. The woman everyone dismissed as just another street person invisible in their peripheral vision? She had 2 engineering degrees from Stanford, 5 patents in advanced automotive technology. She'd been the head of research and development at Velocity Motors, the youngest department head in company history, the engineer who'd designed the cooling system that saved the company $8 million annually. Mini cliffhanger. Evelyn had grown up in Nebraska, Lincoln specifically. Her father had died when she was 12. Heart attack at the factory where he'd worked 60-hour weeks for 23 years. Her mother cleaned houses. 3 jobs. Evelyn wore second-hand clothes and ate cafeteria leftovers her mother brought home in Tupperware containers that smelled like other people's kitchens. She was brilliant. Teachers noticed. Guidance counselors noticed. She got a full ride to Stanford, worked 20 hours a week in the campus library, graduated summa cum laude in mechanical engineering, then went back for a master's in automotive systems. She thought merit mattered. She thought if you were smart enough, worked hard enough, proved yourself enough, the world would see you. That was her first mistake. At Velocity Motors, Evelyn designed breakthrough cooling systems, technology that could handle extreme temperatures without failure. Her innovations went into high-performance vehicles, sports cars, racing machines, prototype engines worth millions. She was good. No. She was exceptional. Jonathan Price noticed. Not her work. Her. "Join me for dinner," he'd say, his hand lingering too long on her shoulder in the lab. "We should discuss your career trajectory, somewhere private." She refused, professionally, then firmly, then bluntly. "I'm here to work, Mr. Price, that's all." His smile had frozen. Something cold had moved behind his eyes. 2 weeks later, she was accused of stealing proprietary designs and selling them to a competitor. The evidence was perfect. Too perfect. Emails from her account she'd never sent. Bank deposits she'd never made. Witnesses who swore they'd seen her meeting with competitors in parking garages after midnight. Her co-workers, people she'd considered friends, testified against her. Her own lawyer looked at the evidence and suggested she take a plea deal. "The jury won't believe you," he'd said. "Not against Price's legal team." She fought anyway, spent her life savings, $47,000, on better lawyers who promised they could prove the frame-up. They couldn't. The billion-dollar corporation had resources she couldn't match, investigators, depositions, legal motions that buried her under paper. She lost her job, her reputation, her apartment when she couldn't pay rent, Her family in Nebraska called once. "Did you do it?" her mother had asked. Not, "We believe you," not, "We're here for you," just, "Did you do it?" The silence after Evelyn said no had been louder than any accusation. She'd been on the streets ever since, 2 years, 1 month, 13 days. But she never stopped being an engineer. Public libraries became her office. She drafted patents on the backs of pizza boxes, on receipts, on napkins from McDonald's where she used the bathroom to wash her face. 5 complete patent applications. Revolutionary technology, worth millions if she could ever afford to file them. She survived because she was smart, and because she refused to let Jonathan Price take the one thing he couldn't steal: her mind. What she didn't know was that in about 30 seconds, a smoking Harley Davidson was going to give her a chance at something she'd lost 2 years ago: hope. The crowd was growing. Chicago's West Side at 4 in the afternoon. Factory workers on their way home. Kids cutting through on bikes. People who lived in the neighborhood and recognized the Iron Wolves patches. Nobody helped. Nobody got close. You didn't mess with the Iron Wolves. Alexander Kane stood beside his bike, phone pressed to his ear, murder in his voice. "Repo, where the hell are you?" Repo was the club's mechanic. Best wrench in 3 states. He was also 25 minutes away, stuck in traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. "Boss, I can't teleport. Traffic's a nightmare. My bike is dying. Right now? I've got the meeting with the North Side chapter in 40 minutes, and if I roll up on a tow truck, I look weak. You understand what weak means in this business?" The Harley's engine made a sound like a wounded animal. Smoke, blue-gray smoke, poured from the exhaust. Temperature gauge climbing, 70 degrees hotter than normal. Alexander had built this bike himself. Custom everything, twin-cam 117 engine, stage 4 upgrade. This machine was his pride, his statement, his 30-year legacy in the motorcycle club world, and it was dying on the side of Cicero Avenue like a piece of junk. "Sir." The voice was female, quiet but clear. Alexander turned. The homeless woman was still there, closer now. 3 feet away. Those eyes, sharp, focused, completely at odds with the torn clothes and dirty skin. "Your oil cooler has a leak in the 3rd bypass line," she said. Blue-gray smoke means coolant is getting into the combustion chamber. Not black smoke from fuel, not white from steam, blue-gray, specific diagnosis. You've got maybe 26 minutes before the engine seizes completely. Alexander stared at her. The phone went silent in his hand. Repo's voice was a distant buzz. "How?" Alexander couldn't finish the sentence. The woman tilted her head toward the bike. "Your temperature gauge. It's reading 247 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Normal operating temperature for a twin-cam 117 is 180 to 200 degrees. At your current rate of increase, total engine failure in 26 minutes. Not 30, 26. Alexander looked at the gauge. 247 degrees. Exactly. His heart kicked once, hard. Who the hell was this woman? "Who sent you?" Alexander's voice dropped to the register that made grown men nervous. "Slater? Is this his move? Send some junkie to mess with my bike before the meeting?" Rick Slater, president of the North Side chapter. Old rival who'd been looking for a way to challenge Alexander's leadership for 3 years. Sabotage wasn't outside his playbook. Evelyn sighed. The sound was patient, almost amused. "If I wanted to hurt you," she said slowly, "I'd just stand here and watch. Say nothing. Let your engine die while you wait for your mechanic. Let you show up late to your meeting. Let your rival see you as weak. I don't need to do anything except walk away." The logic was airtight. Alexander's phone buzzed. "Repo. Boss, I'm still stuck. Accident on the expressway. Could be another hour." Alexander hung up. He looked at the woman. Really looked this time. Past the dirt and torn clothes. Her hands. Calloused, yeah. Street-worn. But the way she held them. Steady, controlled. Not the shaking hands of an addict. Not the damaged hands of someone who'd given up. You can fix it? His voice was different now. Still hard, but listening. 15 minutes, Evelyn said. I need a pencil, heat-resistant tape from a first aid kit, and a bottle of water. Alexander's eyebrows went up. You're gonna fix a $50,000 custom Harley with a pencil and tape? No, Evelyn corrected. I'm going to fix a twin-cam 117 oil cooler bypass failure with graphite powder and polymer adhesive. The pencil and tape are just where I'm getting the materials. Silence. The crowd was murmuring, phones out, recording. Alexander Kane, president of the Iron Wolves, cornered by a homeless woman. He didn't have a choice. Not really. Alexander pulled open one of the bike's saddlebags. First aid kit. Bottle of water. He reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a mechanical pencil from the inside pocket. He used it to mark maps during runs. Here, he said, tossing them to her. Evelyn caught them cleanly. No fumbling. No hesitation. She knelt beside the Harley and lifted the inspection panel like she'd done it 1,000 times. Her movements were surgical. Precise. The way a concert pianist touches keys. The way a sniper assembles a rifle. Alexander folded his arms and watched, half expecting her to fail, half consumed by curiosity about what she was about to do. What happened next will shock you. Evelyn snapped the pencil and removed the graphite core. She set it on the seat and used the bottom of the water bottle to grind it into fine powder. The black graphite glittered under the late afternoon sun, like crushed diamonds. Then she tore heat-resistant tape from the first aid kit, scraped the polymer adhesive from the back with her fingernail, and mixed it thoroughly with the graphite powder. The mixture became a thick black paste. Graphite creates a nanocoating, Evelyn explained as she worked, her voice calm, almost lecturing. Withstands up to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Combined with polymer adhesive, it forms a temporary seal that's extremely effective on high-temperature metal surfaces. Standard emergency repair technique for racing teams when they can't reach a pit stop. She leaned into the engine bay. Her eyes scanned the system like she was reading a familiar book. In seconds, she identified the exact leak point. A bypass line thinner than a pencil, tucked behind the oil cooler assembly where nobody would see it without knowing exactly where to look. She spread the graphite mixture onto the leak with millimeter precision. Alexander moved closer, watching her hands. Street-worn hands, dirty fingernails, hands that had slept in doorways and scrounged through trash bins for food. But as they worked, those hands were steady, professional. Like watching a surgeon operate, like watching an artist paint. The crowd murmured louder. Phones everywhere. A homeless woman repairing the Iron Wolves president's custom Harley with office supplies. If this ended up on YouTube, the comment section would be nuclear. Evelyn worked in silence. Focused. She checked connections, adjusted valve pressure with her bare fingers, then lowered the inspection panel. She straightened, wiped her hands on her jeans. It's done. Alexander looked at his watch. 12 minutes. She'd finished 3 minutes early. Start it, Evelyn said. No arrogance, no smugness, just the plain weight of fact. Alexander straddled the bike. His hand hovered over the ignition. Part of him still waited for an explosion, for the engine to seize, for proof that she was either lucky or insane. He turned the key. The Harley roared. Not the dying groan from before, a perfect throaty roar. Full power, no smoke, no shaking. The temperature gauge dropped, 220, 210, 200, settling at 195 degrees. The bike was alive. Alexander sat there for a second, feeling the rumble between his legs. hearing the perfect idol. Then he looked at Evelyn. Not with contempt. Not with the dismissive glance he reserved for street people, with the gaze of a man trying to decode a mystery that shouldn't exist. "Who are you?" The question left his mouth before he could stop it. Evelyn brushed dust from her knees, met his eyes. No fear, no submission. "The person who designed the original oil cooling system this bike is based on." The answer hung in the air like smoke. Mini cliffhanger. Alexander stayed silent. Processing, his mind running calculations at full speed. Then he swung his leg over the bike, stood, and opened the passenger seat behind him. "Get on." Evelyn hesitated. She knew getting on that bike could change everything, or end everything. But she'd lived on the streets of Chicago for 2 years. She'd learned that sometimes the biggest opportunities come from the craziest risks. She got on the bike. The Harley surged through the streets of Chicago. The engine roared with perfect strength, like nothing had ever been wrong. Evelyn sat behind Alexander, feeling the power of the machine beneath her, the wind cutting through her tangled hair. She hadn't been on a motorcycle in 3 years. Not since the charity ride Velocity Motors had sponsored. Back when she was chief engineer. Back when she wore designer clothes instead of torn jeans. Back when her biggest worry was whether her presentation to the board would get approved. Alexander drove in silence for several minutes. Then he spoke, his voice carrying over the engine noise. "Stanford or MIT?" Evelyn was startled. "How did you—" "The way you solved that problem," Alexander said, his eyes on the road. "That's not YouTube University. That's top-tier engineering education. So which was it?" "Stanford," Evelyn said quietly. 2 degrees. Alexander grunted. "Thought so." They rode for another minute before Evelyn spoke. "Velocity Motors," she began, her voice tight. "I was head of R&D, 5 patents, breakthrough cooling technology for high-performance engines. Saved the company millions annually." Alexander didn't respond, but she knew he was listening. The way a man listens when he's collecting information. "The CEO noticed me," Evelyn continued. "Jonathan Price, started with dinner invitations. Private discussions about my career. Hints that if I was flexible, there were VP positions in my future." She paused. Drew breath, 2 years later, and it still hurt. "I refused. Made it clear. Professional only." A bitter laugh escaped her throat. 2 weeks later, I was accused of stealing designs, selling them to competitors. The evidence was staged perfectly. Fake emails, bank deposits I never made, fake witnesses, everything pointed at me. Alexander's hands tightened slightly on the handlebars. Just a fraction. "Nobody believed me," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Co-workers turned their backs, friends disappeared. My family in Nebraska called once, asked if I really did it. Didn't say they believed me, just asked. That was answer enough." Silence. "I was fired, sued, lost everything. My reputation built over 10 years, destroyed in 10 days. Life savings went to lawyers who couldn't fight a billion-dollar legal team. 2 years homeless." She looked at the buildings passing by, Chicago's skyline against the sunset. "And you know what? Price isn't just any CEO. There were rumors inside the company. Special connections. Money from sources nobody questioned. Secret meetings with people nobody named." Evelyn saw it then. Alexander's jaw hardened. Just for a second, his eyes narrowed in the rearview mirror. He knew something. "I don't need pity," Evelyn said, her voice turning hard. "I'm not telling you this to beg. I just want to use my brain for what I'm good at. To be seen for my ability, not my clothes. Is that too much to ask?" The question hung between them. Alexander rode in silence for a while longer. Then he spoke, his voice colder than ice. "Jonathan Price, that name sounds familiar?" Evelyn looked at him, at the way he ground his teeth, at the way his eyes had gone dark. Alexander Kane wasn't just listening to her story. He was calculating something. That was his second mistake. The Iron Wolves clubhouse wasn't what Evelyn expected. She'd pictured a dive bar, pool tables and broken neon. But this was a compound. 3 buildings behind a chain-link fence on Chicago's west side. The main clubhouse was brick and steel, 2 stories tall, with security cameras at every corner and men in leather vests positioned at strategic points. The gate opened automatically as Alexander approached. No button, no card. The system recognized his bike. He pulled into the courtyard, shut off the engine. The silence after the roar felt heavy. Men appeared from everywhere, 20, maybe 30 members of the Iron Wolves. They straightened when they saw Alexander. Some nodded. Some stepped aside. Everyone showed respect, absolute authority, total obedience. Evelyn climbed off the bike, felt dozens of eyes settle on her. Torn clothes, tangled hair, a homeless woman in the heart of the Iron Wolves territory. This wasn't a mistake. This was suicide. "Boss," a tall man stepped forward. Marcus Webb, 6'2", broad shoulders, arms covered in tribal tattoos, the club's sergeant-at-arms, the enforcer. Marcus looked Evelyn up and down, undisguised contempt. "Who's she?" His voice was rigid, dangerous. "The person who just saved my bike with a pencil," Alexander replied coldly. Marcus didn't waver. "We don't bring outsiders into the clubhouse. That's the rule." "She stays." Alexander's voice wasn't loud, but it was steel. "That's an order." Marcus went silent, jaw clenched. Then he nodded and stepped aside. But his eyes never left Evelyn. They went inside. The clubhouse was bigger than it looked from outside. Main room with a bar, pool tables, leather couches, walls covered with Iron Wolves memorabilia, photos of runs, rally posters, a vintage Harley engine mounted like artwork. But underneath the biker aesthetic, Evelyn noticed something else. Security. Cameras at every corner. Reinforced doors. Biometric locks on the hallway leading deeper into the building. This wasn't just a motorcycle club. This was something more. As they passed a room with a glass door, Evelyn caught a glimpse of a large screen inside. On it was a list with the heading, Accounts Receivable. And on line 3, she saw it. J. Price, Velocity Motors, $850,000. She stopped short. Her heart seemed to skip. Jonathan Price, the man who'd destroyed her life. His name was here, inside the Iron Wolves financial system. Alexander noticed what she was looking at. Without a word, he placed a hand on her elbow and gently but firmly guided her forward. Evelyn didn't resist. But her mind was spinning. Price had connections to the Iron Wolves. The rumors about dangerous people, mysterious funding. It was all connected. Everything began to make sense. Strangely, Evelyn didn't feel afraid. 2 years on Chicago's streets had taught her too much. She'd met every kind of dangerous person. Addicts, thieves, predators who hunted the vulnerable. Compared to nights alone in dark alleys, this place was almost safe. And there was something else, something honest about it. Alexander Kane was the president of a motorcycle club. He didn't hide it. No pretense, no mask. Not like Jonathan Price with his bright smile and knife hidden behind his back. They stopped at a door. Alexander opened it and motioned for her to enter. "Wait here." Evelyn stepped into a room that looked like an office. Leather furniture, a desk, bookshelves. Through the wall, she could hear voices from the room next door. Several voices, tense. Someone was speaking loudly, almost shouting. Something big was happening, and somehow Evelyn knew she was about to be pulled into the center of a storm. This is when everything changed. Inside the meeting room, the air was thick, like before a thunderstorm. Alexander sat at the head of a long oak table, his back against a leather chair, cold eyes sweeping across every face. He said nothing, yet the power radiating from that silence was crushing. Across from him sat Rick Slater, president of the Iron Wolves Northside chapter. Slater was 52, gray-beard, arms like tree trunks. He'd been riding with the Iron Wolves for 30 years, almost as long as Alexander. And he'd wanted Alexander's position for at least 10 of those years. 4 other chapter presidents sat along both sides of the table, watching in silence, waiting to see who would come out on top. Rachel Newen stood in front of a large screen. She was the club's financial officer. 54 years old, salt and pepper hair pulled back, sharp eyes behind reading glasses. She'd managed the Iron Wolves' money for 15 years. And right now, her worry was obvious. "Our digital security has been breached," Rachel began, trying to keep her voice steady. "Financial records accessed. Our business accounts tracked. Someone's selling our information." A whistle came from Slater's direction. "Interesting," he said, his voice dripping sarcasm. "Seems the Iron Wolves aren't as secure as they used to be." Alexander didn't react. Not a muscle moved. Slater leaned forward. "Maybe it's time for new leadership. If a man can't protect his own club, how can he lead all the chapters?" The room froze. Marcus stood behind Alexander, his hand already at his belt. 2 of Slater's men tensed, eyes locked on Marcus. One spark could turn this room into a battlefield. But Alexander still didn't move. He looked at Slater with a calm that was almost unsettling, like looking at an ant trying to climb his boot. "Whoever finds the breach," Alexander finally said, his voice like ice, "proves their worth." Slater faltered. He'd been waiting for anger, waiting for Alexander to lose control so he could escalate with justification. But this composure left him nowhere to go. Alexander turned to Rachel. "Where are we?" Rachel swallowed. "We've tried for 3 weeks, can't find it. The hacker is too good. They covered their tracks perfectly. My team of 8 has worked around the clock. Nothing." "3 weeks," Slater repeated, voice full of contempt. "In 3 weeks an enemy can sell enough information to destroy this entire club, and the Iron Wolves still haven't found one clue. Disappointing." Alexander didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted toward the glass door that looked into the waiting room. He saw her. Evelyn sat on the leather couch. Not worried, not nervous the way anyone else would be if left alone in a biker clubhouse. She was reading an old motorcycle magazine someone had left on the table. Eyes focused. Like she was in a library, not surrounded by men who could make people disappear. There was something about that calmness. She didn't belong here. But she wasn't afraid. She'd fixed his bike with a pencil in 12 minutes. She was the engineer who'd designed advanced cooling systems. She solved problems nobody else could solve. The idea formed in Alexander's mind like lightning. "Bring the girl in here," he ordered. Deadly silence fell. Everyone looked at Alexander like he'd grown another head. Rachel was first to speak. "That homeless woman? You can't be serious." Marcus stepped forward. "Boss, this is a closed meeting. We can't—" "I won't repeat myself." Alexander's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through every objection like a blade. Marcus closed his mouth. Rachel fell silent. Even Slater's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by curiosity. Marcus nodded and left. A few seconds later, the door opened. Evelyn walked in. She stood there. Torn clothes, tangled hair, worn backpack, facing the most dangerous men in Chicago's motorcycle world. Chapter presidents with rap sheets longer than phone books. Men who'd done things civilized society didn't want to know about. They looked at her with contempt, suspicion, hostility. But Evelyn didn't tremble. She stood straight, sharp eyes sweeping the room once, then stopping on Alexander, ready for whatever came next. What happened next would change everything. Rick Slater was the first to break the silence. He laughed, a loud, crisp sound that rang through the tense room. Kane's hiring street junkies as consultants now? He turned to the other chapter presidents, voice thick with mockery. The club really is falling apart. Didn't think I'd see it happen this fast. Snickering laughs rose around the table. They looked at Evelyn the way you look at a joke, an insult in a room built on power and respect. Evelyn stood still, unmoved. She was used to contempt. 2 years on the streets had taught her how to let it slide off like water. Alexander didn't bother answering Slater's provocation. He only turned to Rachel and spoke sharply. "Show her the system." Rachel stared at Alexander like her president had lost his mind, but she didn't dare argue. Reluctantly, she pressed buttons on the control panel. The large screen displayed a schematic of the Iron Wolves financial security system, complex encryption, digital safeguards, server protocols. Evelyn stepped closer to the screen. She said nothing, just stood there, eyes moving across each line of code, each security layer, each access point. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. People began shifting in their seats, trading doubtful looks. 4 minutes. Slater snorted. "See? Waste of everyone's time. She doesn't even understand what she's looking at." Evelyn remained silent. Her eyes kept moving across the screen, processing information at a speed nobody in the room could comprehend. 5 minutes. Then suddenly, she turned away. Without looking at anyone, she walked straight to the whiteboard in the corner, picked up a marker, and began to draw. In 90 seconds, Evelyn recreated the entire security diagram on the whiteboard, from memory, without glancing back at the screen, and her diagram was more accurate than the original, more detailed, clearer. Rachel's eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open. "You have 3 vulnerabilities," Evelyn said, circling 3 points on the diagram. Her voice was calm, like she was teaching first-year students. "First, your main gateway is missing 2-factor authentication. Second, the connection point between your internal system and external banking servers has a weak encryption protocol. Third, and most serious, there's an old API from your previous security version that was never disabled." She drew an arrow cutting through all 3 points. "That's how the hacker got in. They enter through the old API, move laterally through the weak connection point, and pull data through the unprotected gateway. Simple, efficient, almost no trace." Rachel stepped forward. Eyes locked on the whiteboard. You found in 5 minutes what my team of 8 took 3 weeks." She couldn't finish the sentence. The entire room sank into absolute silence. The mocking laughter was gone. Rick Slater wasn't smiling anymore. His face had turned to stone. "The fix is straightforward," Evelyn continued, not noticing or not caring about the shock around her. She added lines to the diagram. "Disable the old API. Implement 2-factor authentication on the gateway. Set up a new firewall at the connection point. Can be done in 24 hours if your team works efficiently." She set the marker down and turned to face the room. "But there's one more problem." The air felt like it had been pulled out of the room. "The hacker's code style," Evelyn said slowly, "is very distinctive, like a signature. The way they write loops, handle exceptions, Format comments. This isn't an outside contractor. This person knows your system from the inside. She looked straight into Alexander's eyes. Someone in your organization is the mole. Deadly silence. The chapter presidents suddenly looked at each other with suspicion. Rachel turned pale. Marcus's hand went to his belt, instinctive vigilance snapping into place. Alexander looked at Evelyn. This time he didn't see a homeless woman. He saw exactly what she was. A genius. A fighter who'd survived hell without breaking. A woman who bowed to nothing and no one. The corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. But for the first time during this meeting, Alexander Kane's stone face showed an expression. Marcus stood behind him and saw it. He frowned, startled. In 15 years riding with Alexander, he'd never seen the boss show emotion like that in front of anyone. Rick Slater stood. His chair screeched against the floor. "Maybe I underestimated you, Kane," he said, voice stretched tight. He moved toward the door, his two men close behind. But before he left, he paused and looked back at Evelyn. That look held no contempt now. It was calculating. Dangerous. Like a predator measuring prey. Then he walked out, door slamming behind him. Evelyn knew what that look meant. She'd just made herself a target for one of the most dangerous men in Chicago's biker world. But she didn't regret it. For the first time in 2 years, she felt her mind being used the way it was meant to be used. Mini cliffhanger. After the meeting, Marcus led Evelyn to a room on the second floor of the clubhouse. He didn't speak, just opened the door and stepped aside. Evelyn walked in and went completely still. The room was bigger than the studio apartment she'd rented back when she was chief engineer at Velocity Motors. A queen-size bed with clean white sheets, dark wood furniture, a private bathroom with a shower that looked like it actually had hot water. On the bed, a set of clean clothes had been laid out. Jones, t-shirt, leather jacket. Evelyn picked them up and realized they were exactly her size. Someone had prepared this. Someone had noticed. The door closed behind her. Evelyn stood alone in the room, feeling like she was dreaming. She walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. Hot water poured down. For the first time in 2 years, she felt hot water running over her skin. Not cold water from a public faucet, not rainwater, real hot water, with soap that smelled like lavender. Evelyn cried. Not from sadness, from being clean, from the fact that for 2 years she'd forgotten what this feeling was like. She stood under the shower for a long time, letting the water wash away the dirt, the exhaustion, the humiliation of months living on the streets. When she stepped out, she stood before the mirror and saw herself. Not the homeless woman everyone had been seeing, but Evelyn Carter. Engineer. Genius. The woman she'd been before Jonathan Price destroyed her life. Then she noticed something. In the corner of the bathroom ceiling, almost impossible to see unless you were looking for it, was a small camera. Evelyn wasn't surprised. This was a motorcycle club with enemies. Of course they watched everything. But a question slipped into her mind. Was Alexander watching? Or someone else? A faint unease ran along her spine. But she pushed it away. She'd survived 2 years on Chicago's streets. A few cameras didn't scare her. An hour later there was a knock at the door. Marcus stood outside, face still cold as stone. "Boss wants to see you. Dinner." Evelyn followed him to a private dining room, smaller than she expected. Warm lighting, a table set for 2 people. Alexander was already seated, no longer in his leather vest, just a black t-shirt that showed the tattoos covering his arms. He looked less intimidating, yet the undeniable authority still clung to him. Food was arranged on the table. Steak, roasted vegetables, beer in frosted glasses. Evelyn looked at the plate in front of her. Her stomach tightened with hunger. This was the best meal she'd seen in 2 years. But she ate slowly, with control. She wouldn't let the hunger that had tormented her through hundreds of nights show on her face. She would not let anyone see her weakness. Alexander watched her eat in silence for a while. Then he spoke. "Why did you help me? You didn't know who I was." Evelyn set her knife down, met his eyes. "I saw a problem that needed fixing. It's instinct. I can't look at a broken system and not want to repair it." "That instinct," Alexander tilted his head, "has gotten you into trouble more than once, hasn't it?" Evelyn gave a quiet laugh. Her first real laugh in a long time. "You're looking at the result." Silence stretched between them. Alexander took a drink of beer. His gaze drifted into empty space, like he was thinking about something far away. "My father was killed," he said suddenly, "by the person he trusted most, his road captain, a brother who'd ridden with him for 15 years. Evelyn didn't speak. She only listened. "I built this club into what it is for one reason," Alexander continued, voice lowering. "So no one would ever have the chance to betray me again. I don't trust easily. I control everything. That's the only way to survive in this world." He looked at Evelyn, his dark eyes complicated. "But you learned all my weaknesses in a few hours. You saw my security flaws, even found the mole in my organization. And I don't feel threatened." Evelyn set her glass down. "Maybe because I don't want anything from you. I've already lost everything. My job, my reputation, my family, my savings. There's nothing left to be greedy for. Nothing left to lose." She paused. "People like me are the least dangerous. Or the most dangerous, depending on how you look at it." Alexander studied her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I need you to find the mole." He walked toward the door, paused for a second, but didn't turn back. "Thank you for dinner," Evelyn said quietly. Alexander didn't answer. He only walked out. The door closed. Evelyn watched his shadow disappear behind the oak door. There was something in Alexander Kane's eyes she couldn't read. Something deeper than the tough guy exterior. Something almost like loneliness. But there was one thing he didn't know. What she was about to discover would shake the Iron Wolves to its foundation. The next morning, Evelyn was taken to the club's computer room. A smaller space than she expected. 4 monitors, 2 servers humming quietly. Rachel Newen was already there, arms crossed, face hard. Clearly she wasn't happy about working with a homeless woman, even if that woman had made the entire meeting room fall silent yesterday. "These are all the system logs from the past 3 months, Rachel said bluntly, pointing at the screen. "Start wherever you want." Evelyn didn't care about the attitude. She pulled out a chair, sat down, began to work. An hour passed in silence. Evelyn drilled into every line of code, every log file, every abnormal access pattern. Rachel stood behind her, arms crossed at first, watching with open skepticism. But little by little she began to lean forward, her eyes tracking what Evelyn was doing. "Where did you learn to analyze like this?" Rachel finally asked, her voice no longer cold. Real curiosity. Evelyn didn't look up, eyes still locked on the screen. 2 years on the streets, nothing but time and library computers. When you've got nothing left to lose, you've got a lot of time to think." Rachel went quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about my attitude earlier." "No need," Evelyn said. "I'm used to it." She kept working, digging deeper into the hacker's patterns. There was something familiar in the way this person wrote code. the way they handled variables, named functions, commented sections, like an invisible signature that only people in the field would recognize. Then suddenly, Evelyn shot to her feet. Her eyes went wide. "No," she whispered. Rachel stepped closer. "What did you find?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She opened more files, compared them, cross-checked. Her heart beat faster with every passing second. She knew this coding style. She'd seen it before, at Velocity Motors. This was exactly how Jonathan Price's technical team wrote code. She'd reviewed thousands of lines like this when she was chief engineer. There was no mistaking it. "The mole has ties to Velocity Motors," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly with rage. "To Jonathan Price." Rachel went pale. "Are you sure?" Evelyn didn't answer. She went deeper, searching for more proof. And what she found was far more horrifying. This wasn't only about selling information. There was a plan, a detailed plan hidden inside encrypted code segments. Evelyn decoded it in minutes, felt the blood turn cold in her veins. Target, Alexander Kane. Time, tonight during meeting with Northside Chapter. Method, explosive device attached to motorcycle. They were going to kill him. Tonight? "Oh my God," Rachel blurted when she saw what was on screen. Evelyn didn't have time to panic. She kept tracing. The code had been uploaded from an internal device, from inside the clubhouse. She traced the IP address, identified the device, finally found the user's identity. Tommy "Wrench" Morrison. Club mechanic for 6 years. The man Alexander trusted with his bike. The man who had access to every machine in the compound. The man who was in the garage right now. Evelyn sprang from the chair. "Where is Alexander?" Rachel pointed down the hall. "Main room, preparing for tonight's meeting. I need to see him, now." "You can't just—" Evelyn was already running, her heart hammered in her chest. 2 hours. Only 2 hours left before Alexander got on a bike carrying a bomb. She reached the main room door and was stopped. Marcus stood there like a steel wall, face blank. "No one interrupts. Alexander will die tonight if you don't let me in." Marcus didn't move. "You think I'm going to believe—" "Wrench," Evelyn cut in. "Tommy Morrison, your mechanic. He's the mole. Working for Jonathan Price and Rick Slater. There's a bomb on Alexander's bike. It'll be triggered when he reaches the meeting point tonight. 2 hours from now." She held out her phone. Screen showing what she'd found. "This is the code. This is the plan. This is the proof. Wrench is in the garage right now. He could be finishing the job." Marcus stared at the phone screen. With every line he read, his face grew paler. He'd ridden with Wrench for 6 years. They'd worked on bikes together, shared beers after long runs, and now Wrench wanted to kill their president. Without a word, Marcus turned and shoved the door open. Alexander sat at the bar with 3 other members, planning the route to the Northside meeting. Everyone looked up as the door flew open, surprise and anger on their faces. Alexander saw Evelyn and Marcus. His eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" Evelyn stepped in, breathing still uneven from running. She looked straight into Alexander's eyes and said one word: "Bomb." This is when Alexander Kane's world shattered. The main room fell into deadly silence. Evelyn stepped forward, voice fast and clear, like a military briefing. "Wrench, Tommy Morrison, your mechanic for 6 years. He's the mole, working for Jonathan Price and Rick Slater. The plan is to plant a bomb on your bike, trigger it when you reach the meeting point. 2 hours from now." She looked straight into Alexander's eyes. "And he's in the garage right now." No one in the room dared breathe too hard. Alexander sat motionless, face showing no emotion, only his eyes, those eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. "Marcus?" His voice was ice cold. "Bring Wrench here. Don't let him suspect anything." Marcus nodded and vanished. The others were signaled to leave. Soon only Alexander and Evelyn remained, facing each other in silence. 5 minutes passed, like 5 hours. Evelyn stood still, feeling Alexander's gaze cut straight through her. Finally, he spoke. "If you're wrong, you just accused my most loyal mechanic, the man who saved my bike a dozen times, the man who's been at my side for 6 years. Evelyn didn't blink. "If I'm right, I just saved your life a second time." The silence stretched. Then the door opened. Wrench walked in, that familiar smile on his lips. He was a big man, 40-something. Grease-stained hands, friendly face nobody would ever suspect. "Hey boss, you called?" Wrench's voice was normal, as always. Alexander stood, walked toward the window, back to Wrench. "Go check my bike, Tommy. Someone said there might be a technical fault, like yesterday." Wrench went rigid, only for a second. So brief it was almost impossible to notice. But Evelyn saw it. Alexander saw it. Marcus, blocking the door, saw it too. "Yeah," Wrench forced a smile. His voice trembled slightly. "I'll go right now." He turned, started toward the door. Then suddenly he ran. Wrench lunged for the exit at terrifying speed, shoved Marcus hard enough to make him stumble. But he didn't get out. 4 Iron Wolves members appeared from both sides of the hallway, sealing every escape. Wrench yanked a gun from his waistband, spinning to shoot. But Marcus was faster. A shot cracked through the air. The bullet slammed into Wrench's shoulder. He went down, gun flying from his hand. Within seconds, Wrench was pinned to the floor, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood streaming from the wound. They dragged him into the main room and threw him into a chair. Alexander sat across from him, only a yard away. His voice was calm in a way that was terrifying, like talking about the weather. "Who hired you?" Wrench spat onto the floor, eyes full of hatred. "You're going to die, Kane. Sooner or later. You can't live forever." Alexander didn't react. He only watched Wrench with eyes cold as ice, waiting. "I'll ask again. Who?" Silence stretched. Wrench tried to look tough, but sweat had already started beading on his forehead. He knew what happened to traitors in this world. Alexander signaled to Marcus. Marcus stepped forward, drew a knife from his belt. The blade gleamed under the light. "Wait!" Wrench shouted, his toughness dissolving like morning mist. "Wait, I'll talk! I'll talk!" Alexander lifted a hand. Marcus stopped. Wrench panted, eyes darting wildly. "Rick Slater, he wants you dead so he can take over the club. He paid me $75,000 to do it." "Who else?" Wrench swallowed hard. And Jonathan Price, CEO of Velocity Motors." Evelyn stood in the corner of the room, feeling like someone had just punched her in the chest. "Price wants you dead," Wrench went on, voice shaking, "because you know too much about the money laundering. He's used the Iron Wolves to clean money for 5 years, over $100 million. Now he wants to eliminate the witness." Deadly silence filled the room. Alexander turned and looked at Evelyn. She stood there, face bloodless, eyes rimmed red. "Jonathan Price," Alexander said slowly, "the man who destroyed your life, who framed you, fired you, pushed you onto the streets. The same man who's trying to kill me." Evelyn felt her knees go weak. For 2 years, she'd thought her tragedy was random. Bad luck. Fate. But no. It was all connected. Price wasn't just a sexual predator who'd been rejected. He was a criminal laundering hundreds of millions in dirty money. And she had accidentally known too much. "Everything," she whispered, voice catching. "Everything is connected." Wrench was dragged away. leaving a streak of blood across the hardwood floor. Alexander stood by the window, back to Evelyn, staring out at Chicago sinking into sunset. Silence stretched like a wire pulled tight, about to snap. Finally, he spoke, voice cold as steel. "Give me 24 hours. Price will disappear from the face of the earth." Marcus nodded from the corner. "I know people in Detroit. Clean, no trace." This was how Alexander Kane always solved problems. Fast, efficient, final. In his world, enemies weren't allowed to exist long enough to become threats. "No." A single word rang through the room. Alexander turned, eyes narrowing. In 15 years leading the Iron Wolves, no one had dared say that word to him. "What did you say?" Evelyn stood straight, facing the president of the most dangerous motorcycle club in the Midwest without trembling. "If you kill Price, he dies quietly. A tragic accident, a mysterious disappearance. No one knows the truth. His family will mourn him. The press will write tributes, and the world will keep thinking I'm a thief." Alexander fell silent. In his mind, two voices collided. The old voice, the one that had guided him for 15 years, roared, "Kill him. It's the only certainty. Your father died because he trusted people. Don't repeat that mistake." But there was another voice, smaller, unfamiliar, his father's voice from long ago. When he was still alive, when he taught Alexander that real strength wasn't just violence. You can kill anyone you want. But it won't make you stronger. It will only make you lonelier. His father was dead, betrayed by the man he trusted most. So what did mercy mean? "I want him to die in humiliation," Evelyn continued, voice trembling as emotion surged. "I want the world to know he's a sexual predator, a liar who framed people, a money launderer. I want his family to look at him the way my family looked at me. I want his children to feel ashamed carrying his name. I want him to live long enough to watch everything he built collapse in front of him." She stepped closer, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "That's real revenge. Not a clean bullet, but slow destruction. Painful, public." Alexander said nothing. He only stood there, listening, face unreadable while his eyes bored into her. "We have evidence from Wrench," Evelyn said, voice steadier now, like an engineer laying out a plan. "Money laundering transfers, links to Slater, a murder plot. We send it simultaneously to major media, the FBI, the SEC. We make everything public, including the frame job against me. We let the system he abused crush him, slowly, painfully." Marcus stepped forward. "Boss, that's risky. Price has lawyers, connections. He could slip out. Your way is certain." "Your way is fast," Evelyn said, turning to Marcus, then back to Alexander. "But it changes nothing. Price dies. There will be another Price. The system stays. Men like him keep thinking they're untouchable." She walked up until she stood in front of Alexander, less than 2 feet between them. "But if we expose him, if the whole world watches him fall in humiliation, every man like him will be afraid. They'll look at Price and wonder if they're next." Silence stretched again. Alexander looked at Evelyn for a long time. He had met many people in his life, the greedy, the fearful, the ones drunk on power. But she was different, not innocence. Evelyn Carter wasn't innocent. 2 years on the streets had burned every trace of innocence out of her. This was strength, a kind of strength he wasn't used to. Not the strength of violence, but the strength of endurance, of being knocked down and refusing to stay down. "Fine." One word. Marcus's eyes widened. "Boss, we'll do it your way," Alexander said, his voice still cold, but something in it had shifted. He looked at Evelyn with new eyes. No longer the eyes of a boss looking at a tool, the eyes of a man learning something new. "But if this fails," he added, voice dropping like distant thunder, I'll do it my way, and that time, no one will be able to stop me. Evelyn nodded. Fair enough. And for the first time in 15 years, Alexander Kane chose a path other than violence. Not because he was weak, but because a homeless woman had shown him a kind of strength he had never known existed. What neither of them knew was that in the next 72 hours, their decision would trigger a chain of events that would change Chicago forever. Day one began like a storm gathering energy. Evelyn sat in the Iron Wolves computer room, working without pause beside Rachel Newen. The evidence from Wrench was compiled into clear, organized files. Money laundering transfers over the past 5 years, specific amounts, dates, bank account numbers, internal emails between Price and Slater, discussing business arrangements and problem-solving, recordings of secret meetings. Wrench had worn a wire twice. The audio was damning. Evelyn added materials she'd kept from 2 years earlier. Documents from her former lawyer proving the evidence against her had been fabricated. Emails that showed impossible timestamps. Bank deposits that came from accounts traced back to Price's shell companies. Everything was packaged neatly. Plainly. Impossible to deny. Alexander stood behind her, watching her work with undisguised admiration. "You're good at this," he said quietly. Evelyn didn't look up from the screen. "I've had 2 years to think about it." Day 2. Anonymous packets were sent simultaneously to the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, and CNN. At the same time, the FBI received an anonymous tip with full evidence of money laundering. The SEC received a detailed report on financial fraud, and the lawyer Alexander hired for Evelyn, one of the best lawyers in Chicago, paid for with club money, officially filed a complaint regarding the false accusations from 2 years earlier. Everything was calculated with the precision of a machine. At 2:47 p.m. on day 2, Jonathan Price was standing on stage at Velocity Motors' annual shareholders meeting. A confident smile spread across his face. "Velocity Motors has never been stronger," he declared, pride thick in his voice. "Revenue last quarter is up 28%. We are leading the innovation curve. Our patents portfolio is worth over $200 million. The meeting room doors flew open. Price's assistant ran in, face white as paper. She leaned in and whispered into his ear. The smile on Jonathan Price's face froze, then disappeared. The color drained from him like someone had pulled a plug. Outside the building, shareholders' phones began vibrating non-stop. The news spread like wildfire. Breaking: Velocity Motors. CEO accused of large-scale fraud, money laundering ring exposed. $100 million former employee cleared after 2 years. Evidence of frame-up Velocity Motors stock went into freefall, losing 47% of its value in 2 hours. The board convened an emergency meeting. Partners began cutting ties, and the FBI arrived. A task force surrounded Velocity Motors headquarters. Dozens of agents, police vehicles blocking every exit. Price tried to run out the back, clutching a briefcase full of documents he hoped he could destroy. But cameras were already waiting. Dozens of reporters, hundreds of lenses. The whole world watching live. Jonathan Price was handcuffed right at the back gate of the building he had once ruled. His face twisted with fury and fear, sweat pouring down. Mouth stammering denials no one bothered to hear. This wasn't the silent death in the dark Alexander had planned. This was public destruction. Humiliating. Complete. In the Iron Wolves clubhouse, Evelyn sat in the main room, eyes fixed on the television screen. Alexander sat beside her, at a distance that respected her space. They watched Price being shoved into an FBI vehicle, watched him duck his head from the cameras, watched the empire he had built collapse in real time. Evelyn didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't shed victorious tears. There was only calm, like someone finally setting down a burden she had carried for 2 years. "It's over," she said softly, voice strangely steady. Alexander studied her. He had prepared himself for tears, for triumphant laughter, for the satisfaction of a woman who had finally taken revenge, but she only sat there, peaceful as a lake after a storm. "Aren't you happy?" he asked. Evelyn turned to look at him, eyes clear as they had ever been. "I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to stop. Those are two different things." Alexander fell silent for a moment, turning that sentence over in his mind. In his world, revenge was blood for blood, pain for pain. But she had taught him a different kind of revenge, the kind that left no blood on your hands, yet destroyed even more thoroughly. "You know what makes you different?" Alexander said, voice softer than usual. "You don't let hatred eat you alive." Evelyn looked back at the screen. News still replaying footage of Price being escorted away. "I let it eat me alive long enough," she said. 2 years on the streets, that's enough." But there was one thing neither of them knew. Rick Slater had seen the news too, and he was making plans of his own. A week passed like a dream. The shockwaves from the Jonathan Price scandal rippled across America, and Evelyn Carter stood in the center of that storm, not as a disgraced criminal, but as a victim finally cleared. The press published apologies. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story. "Genius engineer framed a story of injustice and the power of truth." The New York Times ran a detailed investigative piece on how Jonathan Price had staged fake evidence to destroy her. Velocity Motors, now in chaos under an interim board, publicly admitted Evelyn Carter was completely innocent. Issued an official apology. The patents she had developed were returned to her. Full ownership restored. And Stanford reached out, invited her back to teach. Evelyn sat alone in her room at the Iron Wolves clubhouse, surrounded by stacks of newspapers, a tablet displaying dozens of articles. She read every line, every word. Her name no longer came paired with accused or alleged. Instead, it came with vindicated, brilliant, engineer, survivor. Something broke open inside her chest. Not the kind of breaking that hurts. The kind that happens when walls you've built to protect yourself finally collapse because you don't need them anymore. The phone Alexander had bought for her began to vibrate. Evelyn looked at the screen. An unknown number. A Nebraska area code. Her heart kicked faster. She stared at the screen, finger hovering over the answer button. 2 years. 2 years without a single call from her family. They didn't call. She didn't call. Silence like a bottomless abyss between them. She pressed answer. "Hello?" Silence on the other end, then sobbing. The choking sobs of a woman who had held her tears too long. "Evelyn, are you there?" Her mother's voice. Evelyn couldn't speak, throat locked up like someone was squeezing it tight. "My baby!" her mother cried. "I'm sorry, I didn't believe you. I read the news. I saw everything. The rest of the sentence vanished under the sound of tears. Evelyn felt something warm roll down her cheek. Tears. For the first time in 2 years, she cried, not from pain, not from despair, but from being loved. From the simple fact that after everything, her mother had finally called. "Mom," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'm okay. I'm all right now." "I should have believed you," her mother kept crying. "I'm your mother. I should have stood with you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I forgive you," Evelyn said, and she surprised herself by realizing it was true. She forgave her. Not because her mother deserved it, but because Evelyn needed to be freed from the weight of resentment. "I'll come home soon." The call ended, but Evelyn stayed where she was. phone pressed to her chest. Tears still flowing. She didn't realize Alexander was standing in the doorway, that he had been there through the entire call. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak. He only stood there quietly, respecting the most private moment of her life. When Evelyn wiped her tears and looked up, she finally saw him. Alexander walked in, sat down in the chair across from her. "You can go back to Nebraska," he said, voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "Build your old life again. Go back to Stanford. Work for any company you want. With your name restored, you can have everything." Evelyn looked at him, eyes still red-rimmed, but lit with something stronger than tears. "The old life is gone," she said slowly. "I'm not that person anymore. The naive woman who believed hard work was enough. The one who thought the system would protect her if she did everything right." She stood, walked to the window overlooking Chicago. "I want to build something new, something that matters more." She turned back, looking straight into Alexander's eyes. "And I want to build it here." It wasn't a confession of love. Evelyn knew that. Alexander knew it too. But it was a commitment, a promise that she would stay, that whatever the future held, she had chosen to stand here beside him in this chaotic world. But what came next would test that commitment in ways neither of them expected. 2 days later, Evelyn received an invitation to Alexander's private office. She walked into the room on the second floor, large windows offering a view over Chicago's west side. She had changed. No more torn clothes or tangled hair. Now she wore clean jeans, a fitted black t-shirt, leather jacket, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, back straight, steps confident. She was still herself. Only now the dust of the streets no longer covered her. Alexander sat behind a desk and motioned for her to take the chair across from him. He didn't circle around the point. He wanted to hire her. Any position she wanted. Head of Security Technology, Financial Systems Director. She could choose, name her salary. Any number. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't need a job." Alexander raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised for the first time since they'd met. "What do you want then?" "Something bigger," Evelyn said. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city. Below, Chicago stretched wide, skyscrapers and crowded roads. But she knew that in the corners no one looked at. There were thousands of people like she used to be, invisible, forgotten. "I want to build an innovation shelter," she said. "Not an ordinary shelter where people only have a place to sleep for a night, but a center to discover talent, combining housing, technical training, mentorship, and startup funding for people the system has left behind." Alexander didn't speak. He only listened with absolute focus. Evelyn continued. "In the shelter I stayed in, I met a doctor who'd been stripped of his license because of an administrative mistake. Not a medical one. 15 years of practice, thousands of lives saved. Lost everything because a form had been filled out wrong." Her voice dropped. "I met a programmer, ex-prisoner. He'd paid for a mistake from his youth. But no one would give him a second chance. He wrote cleaner code than anyone I'd ever seen. But no company would even look at him once they saw a criminal record." She paused. "I also met a physics professor. Used to teach at a top university. Fired when they discovered she had once been treated for mental illness. The illness had been gone for 10 years. But the stigma never went away." Evelyn looked straight into Alexander's eyes. All of them were geniuses in their fields. All of them were being wasted, sleeping on sidewalks, standing in line for charity meals, while the world kept complaining about a shortage of talent. She went back to the desk, pulled out a crumpled stack of papers from her backpack. Old newspaper pages, backs of receipts, napkins from restaurants, even the lid of a pizza box. She laid them on the desk in front of Alexander. These are the patents I developed over the past 2 years in the public library, on park benches, under street lights when I had nowhere to sleep. Alexander picked up the papers. His eyes widened. These weren't the frantic scribbles of a madwoman. They were detailed, precise, fully workable engineering designs, a new energy system using waste heat from buildings, an AI cooling system that could cut electricity use for data centers by 50%, quantum storage technology that could revolutionize data storage. "You did this while you were homeless?" he asked, unable to finish. Evelyn nodded. 5 patents, worth an estimated $8 million if sold to major tech companies. She took the papers back from his hands. "I could sell them, get rich again from the beginning, live a comfortable life." She looked at him. "Instead, I want to use them to build something that changes the entire system, so people like me, like that doctor, like that programmer, like that professor, can have the second chance they deserved." Alexander set his hand on the desk, stayed silent for a long time. Then he spoke slowly, like he was trying to understand something beyond the limits of his own instincts. "You don't want money, don't want power, don't want revenge, even though you had every reason to hate the whole world." He paused. "You want to change it." Evelyn answered quietly. "I want no one to go through what I went through. My tragedy wasn't 2 years of homelessness. I survived that. The tragedy was that the world wasted me for 2 years and keeps wasting millions of others every day." She leaned forward. "How many inventions will never be created? How many diseases will never be cured? How many problems will never be solved? Because the people who could do it are lying on sidewalks, judged by their clothes instead of their minds." Alexander folded the papers, set them down. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't fully read. Respect, certainly, but something else as well. "You know what I am," he said. "You know where my money comes from. You know my hands aren't clean." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Do you still want to work with me?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I know who you are. I know where the money comes from, but I also know you gave me a chance when no one else did, and I believe people can change." Alexander looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Fine. I'll fund the innovation shelter. 100%. Every cost. Construction, operations, staff, all of it." He stood, stepping closer. "But I have a condition. You have to be the one in charge. CEO. Full authority over everything connected to the shelter. I'm only the sponsor. I won't interfere with how you run it." He paused. "And you have to stay in Chicago." Evelyn felt the weight of that last sentence. It wasn't only a business condition. It was an offer to stay beside him. "I'll accept," she said, "but I have a condition too." Alexander lifted an eyebrow, waiting. "Your club has to become legal, gradually," Evelyn said bluntly. "I can't build a future for people the system forgot on a foundation of darkness. The innovation shelter has to be clean, and for it to be clean, the money has to be clean." A deadly silence filled the room. Alexander stood motionless, like a stone statue. Evelyn knew what she had just asked. Alexander's club had been built in darkness for 15 years. Protection rackets, money laundering for people like Price, illegal gambling operations. That was the backbone of the Iron Wolves' power. Going legal meant giving up everything. Power. Money. The absolute control he had lived on. Inside Alexander, war was raging. The old voice roared, "Are you insane? 15 years building this and you're going to burn it down for one woman?" But there was another voice. Smaller, yet clearer than it had ever been. 15 years living in the dark. 15 years looking over your shoulder every day. 15 years unable to trust anyone. Lonely, Down to the bone. Was that living or just surviving? Going legal also meant freedom. No more FBI watching. No more enemies trying to kill him. No more living in a fortress and sleeping with a gun under his pillow. "You're asking me to change everything?" Alexander finally said, voice deep and heavy. "I'm asking you to build something better," Evelyn answered, not stepping back. "You can keep going the same way, powerful, dangerous, and lonely until your last day. Or you can try a different road, the road your father probably wanted you to take." Alexander flinched at the mention of his father. She had touched the weakest point in him, and she knew it. But it wasn't manipulation. It was truth. He walked to the window, back to Evelyn, staring out at Chicago sinking into dusk. Silence stretched. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Evelyn didn't push him. She knew this was the biggest decision of Alexander Kane's life. She would give him the time he needed. Finally, Alexander turned back. Something had changed in his eyes. Not as cold as before. Something softer. Warmer. "All right," he said slowly. "We'll do it. Iron Wolves Foundation. That will be the new name. Legal. And the innovation shelter will be the first project." Evelyn felt like someone had lifted a 1,000-pound stone off her chest. She stood and walked to the window beside him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." Alexander turned to her, the distance between them only inches. "Do you know you've changed me?" he asked, voice dropping. "Before I met you, I thought strength only came in one form: violence, control, fear. You showed me there's another kind of strength." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You gave me a chance when no one else did. You saw me when the whole world only saw a homeless woman. We changed each other." They stood there, looking into each other's eyes. The world around them seemed to stop. Then Alexander bent down. His lips touched hers, not an explosive cinematic kiss. Gentle, soft, like a promise. Like two people who had walked through their own private hell and finally found each other on the other side. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. No words needed. "The innovation shelter will be built on the west side," Alexander said, voice warmer than it had ever been. "Right where I found you, where you used to sleep on the street." Evelyn nodded, eyes shining. "Rachel will be the technical advisor. Marcus will handle security. And you—" Alexander took her hand. "You'll be the CEO, and the woman beside me." They stood by the window, looking out at Chicago as the lights slowly came on in the sunset. The city glittered like a painting made of light. "Chicago is beautiful at night," Evelyn said quietly. Alexander looked at her, a rare smile spreading across his mouth. "For the first time, I noticed." But neither of them knew that Rick Slater was watching from across the street. And he wasn't done fighting. This is where the real war begins. 1 year later, the Innovation Shelter Building stood tall on Chicago's west side, exactly on the spot where Evelyn Carter had once slept on the sidewalk during bitter winter nights. The modern building with its gleaming glass facade reflected sunlight. A large sign read, "Innovation Shelter, where potential becomes purpose." Today was the official grand opening. Guests had come from everywhere. The mayor of Chicago sat in the front row. Reporters from the biggest newspapers in America crowded together with cameras and microphones. CEOs from leading technology companies were present, not out of courtesy, but because they wanted to recruit talent from this place. And most importantly, hundreds of formerly homeless people, along with their families, sat in the auditorium, faces radiant with new hope. Evelyn stepped onto the stage. She was no longer the ragged woman with tangled hair. She wore an elegant gray suit, hair neatly brushed, presence confident, yet still carrying the humility that had become part of her. She was a respected CEO, but she'd never forgotten who she used to be. 1 year ago, Evelyn began, her voice carrying through the hall, I slept on the sidewalk, just a few steps from here, right on the spot where this building now stands. She paused, letting the audience feel the weight of that sentence. I had 2 degrees from Stanford and 5 patents, but the world only saw my torn clothes. They saw a homeless person, not an engineer. They saw a problem to avoid, not a solution waiting to be used. She looked across the auditorium. Today we change that, not by giving someone a fish, but by seeing who they truly are and giving them the chance to shine. Applause rolled like thunder. Evelyn smiled and introduced the first 3 residents to step onto the stage. Dr. Michael Torres, who had once lost his license because of an administrative mistake, was now the medical director of Innovation Shelter. James Liu, the programmer and former prisoner whose application no company would glance at, now had an app that Google had just acquired for $12 million. Professor Sarah Mitchell, who had once been fired because of mental health stigma, now taught 50 students every week. They stood there as living proof that potential never disappears. It only waits to be awakened. Alexander sat in the front row, looking at Evelyn with undisguised pride. The Iron Wolves Foundation was now Chicago's largest legal charitable organization. The underground operations had been significantly reduced. 70% of the club had been legalized. He was changing. Step by step. Just as he'd promised her. On the large screen behind the stage, news headlines scrolled by. Rick Slater had been arrested, his empire collapsing after losing the support he thought he had. And Jonathan Price, the man who had destroyed Evelyn's life, was now serving a sentence of 25 years without the possibility of parole. Velocity Motors had gone bankrupt, its assets used to compensate victims. After the ceremony, when the crowd had dispersed, Evelyn and Alexander stood in front of the Harley-Davidson CVO Limited, the same bike that had brought them together a year ago. I told them to leave the repair mark, Alexander said, pointing to the engine compartment where Evelyn's graphite mixture had once been. To remind me of that day. Evelyn gave a soft laugh. Her fingertips brushed the trace of the past. What did you think that day when you saw me? She asked. That I was crazy? Or a scammer? Alexander looked at her, eyes warmer than ever. That maybe the universe was giving me a second chance, a chance to trust someone, a chance to change. He let out a slow breath. I almost missed it. I almost called security. I almost never found out who you were. But you didn't, Evelyn said quietly. The best decision of my life. They stood together in silence for a moment. Evelyn thought about the numbers. 287 people had rebuilt their careers because of Innovation Shelter. 17 new patents had been registered by residents. The model was being expanded to 8 other cities. The total value created for the economy was estimated at over $85 million. But to her, those numbers mattered less than the faces. The smiles of people who had found hope again. The tears of families reunited. How many people out there are waiting for someone to truly see them? Evelyn asked, voice distant. Too many, Alexander replied. That's why we keep going. They got on the bike. Alexander started the engine. The familiar roar rose up. The Harley glided through the streets of Chicago, heading toward the sunset, painting the horizon red. On the radio, the announcer's voice came through. Good news for those concerned about homelessness. Chicago's Innovation Shelter model is being considered for nationwide adoption after extraordinary success in its first year of operation. Evelyn looked out at the city and smiled. The buildings shimmered in the late light, reflecting the sunset like brushed gold. Alexander took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. She turned to look at him. In that moment, they both knew their journey was only beginning. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been judged by your appearance instead of your ability? Have you ever been the person everyone dismissed until you proved them wrong? Or have you been the person who offered someone else a chance when no one else did? Drop your story in the comments below. Share this story, not the sanitized version, the real version. Because a person's value doesn't lie in the clothes they wear, the address they live at, or the balance in their bank account. Real value lives in intelligence, in heart, and in what a person can contribute to the world if they're given a chance. Evelyn and Alexander's story isn't just a story about love or redemption. It's a reminder that each of us can be someone's Alexander, the one who offers an opportunity instead of judgment. And each of us can also be Evelyn, the one who refuses to let hardship define her, the one who turns pain into strength to change the world. Subscribe to channel, because the truth they don't want you to know is this. The world is full of genius. It's just sleeping on sidewalks, locked in prisons, hidden behind diagnoses and mistakes and circumstances beyond anyone's control. And it's waiting for someone to see it. Be that someone. Stay just. Stay loud. Stay free. Stay